Hello everybody and welcome to the Gaming Grappler. If you're new to my channel, normally I like to talk about video games and mixed martial arts, but my last video was a review for the film Nobody, and that was hands down the best action movie I've seen in the past 5 years. Yeah, I'll even say that it was better than John Wick. I don't care how many slings and arrows I have to take for making that statement. I stand by it. But for today's video, is about Dune 2021, directed by Denis Villeneuve. And we're just going to forget that the David Lynch version of that film even exists. And is Dune right for you? Because that's the question. I think most people, most critics would agree that Dune was a competently made movie. It was a movie with fantastic cinematography, good acting, a good plot, and a good soundtrack composed by Hans Zimmerman. And Hans Zimmerman is the guy that usually makes the soundtrack for all the Christopher Nolan movies like Batman, The Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar. But that guy, he rejected working with his partner to work on Dune, and it shows. I'm usually not a big fan of Hans Zimmerman. I think that his music is usually overly grandiose and it takes itself way too seriously half the time. But for Dune, he was really innovative and creative with the soundtrack, and even I came out liking it. So that just goes to show that there was a lot of passion put into this movie, that Denis Villeneuve was always, he said in interviews that he had always wanted to direct his own version of Dune, and it's been a passion for him ever since he was a child. And I think he pretty much executed this movie as perfectly as you can. You have to understand that Dune, the novels written by Frank Herbert, are some of the most lore-densely packed Bibles out there. Thousands of pages just explaining what's going on in the background. And the way Villeneuve got around this was by showcasing a lot of that lore, not overtly through the plot and the characters, but by what's happening in the background. And I'll get more into that later. But I can just also say another reason why this movie was so appealing to me was that I'm finally happy that we get a big budget blockbuster movie that isn't some cape shit Marvel superhero movie. Now, I'm not saying I'm above a good comic book movie. I think I enjoyed the Suicide Squad 2 pretty well, but I'm sick of these movies. I'm sick of the formula. I am burnt out from comic book movies. And one of the reasons why I'm so burnt out from these movies is that I hate how every character in a Marvel superhero movie has to be injected with 25% of Tony Stark's personality. I hate how every character and side character has to be some quippy, sarcastic asshole, and they can't take anything seriously for half a second. That's one of my big criticisms about Guardians of the Galaxy, is that every time there was something serious or an emotional moment was on the screen, some character would have to break the moment just to make a cheap joke, just basically to instantly gratify ourselves with a cheap joke. I'm sick of the fight scenes at the end of those movies that are giant warlike scenes that destroy half a city, but still somehow there's no stakes in any of that. And that's one of my criticisms of Marvel movies. So I'm happy to see that we finally get a big budget mainstream blockbuster movie that's an actual passion project where the characters take everything seriously. I think there's one joke character in the movie. I think Duncan Idaho is kind of like that quippy kind of character, but other than that, all the characters are real human beings with motivations, traumas, and real angles that they're working towards. And that was genuinely exciting to see. And while I think that a lot of general audiences didn't like the fact that Dune was a slow burn, that's one of the things I found most appealing about the movie. Like I mentioned before, Dune tells its story just as much through the environments and cinematography as it does through the characters and the plot. And what that means is that a huge percentage of the story could be understood by looking at what's happening in the background of scenes, seeing what kind of technology the characters are using, and through studying the environments. There's a lot of long establishing wide shots that just show the desert and the people who live in this kind of planet. And that was something that was appealing to me because it reminded me of my favorite genre of video games, the Metroidvania. And if you've never played a Metroidvania is a game that is non-linear and open-ended. The player is thrust into a world that they've never been before, and they have to explore and figure out what the hell is going on. And Dune is like a Metroidvania. Paul Atreides is kind of like the main character from a Metroidvania game. He is a foreigner thrown into a hostile environment. The planet Arrakis is one of the most dangerous, hostile planets in the universe. It's a desert planet crawling with gigantic sandworms that are hundreds of meters long and can devour entire buildings. The planet is so hot and so dangerous that the people that live on the planet, the freemen, have to wear these skin-tight skin suits that recycle the body's moisture. And even then, it's still possible to die of thirst. And Paul Atreides, like the main character in a Metroidvania, has to study and explore and learn about the world that he's coming into. That is one of the most appealing things about that. Metroidvanias are known for telling their plot and their story not through 2-hour cutscenes where exposition is dumped onto the player, but through experiencing the game itself. And Dune doesn't just tell its story through info dumps or through characters. We see Paul Atreides using and doing research on the planet Arrakis. We see him exploring and learning the ways of Arrakis, just like the main character of a Metroidvania. And I found that very appealing to me. One of the most interesting things about Dune is just how much it leaves the viewer to figure out what the hell is going on. And I'm going to explain this. The lore of Dune is completely unique to science fiction. It is a world that is far into the future, thousands of years in the future, but there's no AI or automation due to a war that is never shown in the movie. It's never referenced. This is something that you would only get from doing a wiki dive or reading the books. But basically, in the history of Dune, there was this colossal war with humans versus machines. And as a result of that war, while human beings came out on top, they decided to outright ban all forms of AI or automation. And what that means is that in the universe of Dune, all technology, while it is highly advanced, has to be operated and piloted by a human being. And that means even space travel has to be done by human beings. Human beings have to have a workaround for everything that used to involve AI. And in order to travel through space, there's this narcotic drug called the spice. And this is the main plot device of Dune. And the spice is this drug that heavily mutates a human being, and it gives human beings basically kind of Jedi-like abilities where they can see into the future, they can control people with their mind, and they get heavily mutated. And human beings that are severely mutated, they turn into these giant brains in jars. At least that's what happened in the David Lynch version. And they can see thousands of light years into the future and make all these accurate predictions and calculations. And those brains in jars are responsible for space travel. So spice is an allegory for two things. It's an allegory for drugs and psychedelics like mushrooms. Yes, I'm not even fucking with you. That is a real thing that Frank Herbert directly made. And it's an allegory to oil because this narcotic drug is responsible for space travel in this world without any form of AI or automation. And I'm not kidding about there being no AI or automation. You never at any point in this film see a character pull up some holographic heads-up display or even an operating system like Windows. Everything is tactile and operated by a human being. And that was just unique. And what I loved about all this lore about Dune is absolutely none of anything I just told you is outright explained or told to the viewer in the film. There's no Star Wars text crawl explaining where we are in the universe or what happened in the history. All of this is just implicitly understood by paying attention to the film. We know that all technology doesn't have an AI because we at no point in the movie see an AI or artificial intelligence or computers being used for anything. Everything is some tactile instrumentation. We see characters using compasses or highly advanced versions of a compass. We see Paul Atreides, rather than pulling up some sort of technological ebook, he just reads from a physical book. That's how he researched about planet Arrakis. And all the technology, while being highly advanced, again, is operated solely by a human being. The planes on planet Arrakis are not like helicopters like you typically see. They're these dragonfly-like robotic machines, and it's really interesting. It's advanced, but it's interesting, and I just enjoy the fact that there's so much of this movie that you have to understand by paying attention to it, seeing what's happening in the background of the scene, analyzing the environments, and getting a feel for this world. It's a movie that rewards viewers for being attentive and taking in the world. And another thing I liked about Dune is that the sociology of Dune is crazy. Humans are more competent than they've ever been. They're doing everything by hand. They don't rely off of technology. They have to become smart and capable, but they're also more barbaric than they've ever been. Since the technology in Dune, there's this device called a shield. And a shield puts up this energy-like barrier around the user. And what that barrier does is it stops all fast-moving projectiles. If there's anything fast-moving in, the shield will automatically rise up to defend the user from whatever weapon is being used on them. However, a slow-moving weapon can penetrate the shield, and it's like this bypassing mechanism to get through it. It's a nice workaround for that. So what that means is that all combat in Dune is, for the most part, hand-to-hand or close-range. Characters have to get up close and personal in order to fight. There are some projectile weapons, but it's really interesting what they did. Rather than shooting a gun or a bullet, characters have to fire these drone-like darts that slow down upon entry into the shield. Everything in Dune is just so creative and unique to get around this workaround of there's no AI, we can't use guns anymore, but we have to use a workaround to get around these things. And one of the scenes in Dune showcasing just how brutal human beings are our main villains, the Harkonnens, and their Sardaukar fight force. There's a scene in the movie where before they go into battle, the Sardaukar are doing ritual human sacrifice. And this is where Hans Zimmerman, the guy who did the soundtrack for the movie, really elevated this scene. Rather than showing generic war drums going on in the background, he opted to go with Mongolian throat singing. And it just works. The guy was just creative with everything that was done in this movie. So it just shows that even though we are highly advanced and in the future and technology has progressed really forward, human beings are maybe smarter, but they're damn are they more brutal than they've ever been historically. So I do want to talk more about the characters and the plot. I want to talk about Paul Atreides' character growth and where that's going in the movie and just the overall themes of the film. But I feel like that's inappropriate to do in this video specifically because Dune, this is only part one of Dune. This movie was made with the assumption that you'd see it with the first and the second one. I will be doing an in-depth analysis after part two of Dune comes out. I feel like it's inappropriate to criticize the way a character is developing without seeing how their character develops in its entirety. I only have 50% of Paul Atreides' character growth, so I'll be waiting until part two to give my final thoughts on the film. But as for me, I think Dune was a fantastic movie. It was a movie with beautiful cinematography. If you got a home theater set up, you're going to love this movie. So yeah, I would highly recommend Dune. I think it's right for you.